Since ancient times, the financial elite have been planning, waiting. Dreams of domination, of total control, have been passed down. Their plan has changed hands countless times, but its core goal has remained unchanged, nurtured through generations. From Caesar to Charlemagne, from Napoleon to Roosevelt, and down to the present day, and the first generation with the technology to carry that plan out. When they unleash it on an unsuspecting public, there will be no time to prepare, no time to react. In just 48 hours, the elites will freeze bank and brokerage accounts worldwide. Millions of Americans will lose access to their own money, in some cases, forever. And the elites will have seized unprecedented control over our money and our very lives. But one of their most respected members has decided to break ranks. He has agreed to expose their plan today in full. What he reveals over the next few minutes could save your family from sudden financial ruin. As you're about to see, it could one day save your life. Hello, I'm John Burke for the Daily Reckoning. We are coming to you today from our perch overlooking the White House in our nation's capital. Welcome to this emergency briefing with Jim Rickards, financial threat and asymmetric warfare advisor to the White House, Pentagon, and CIA. Rickards joins us today with an urgent warning, one he hopes all Americans will heed. According to Jim Rickards and members of the U.S. intelligence community, the time to prepare has arrived. Mr. Rickards, welcome to our broadcast.
My pleasure, John. Thank you for having me.
Now, your team has identified a network of elite operatives, and they have wormed their way into many of the most powerful financial institutions on earth. This list includes the International Monetary Fund, the Bank of International Settlements, the World Bank, the United Nations, and every central bank in the G20, including our own Federal Reserve. When the signal sounds, you predict that this network will pull the plug on the global financial system. Now, that will cause every bank, brokerage, and business to go dark in a massive coordinated attack. Their latest hit list, if you will, includes some 5,967 banks, such as Wells Fargo, Citigroup, and JP Morgan Chase. But they won't stop at the banks. These elite operatives will move to take control of approximately 3,800 asset managers as well. Now, Jim, you expect to see them seize control of BlackRock for nearly $5 trillion, Fidelity for $2 trillion, Vanguard for $3 trillion, and UBS and State Street for a combined $5 trillion or so. And when the freeze comes, citizens nationwide will lose access to their money almost instantly. No cash will be allowed to enter or exit the system without the network's approval. And Donald Trump's presidency will not likely survive the chaos about to ensue. But before we get to the details about this, I want to remind our viewers of your background, Jim. In the 1970s, you helped the White House to craft the petrodollar accord. Your actions helped to save the U.S. dollar and the oil embargo and sidestep war in the Middle East. In 1981, you helped the Reagan administration negotiate an end to the Iran hostage crisis, saving 53 American lives. In the 1990s, you helped the Fed wind down long-term capital management, averting a collapse of the global financial system. After 9/11, the CIA recruited you to assist on a counterterrorism project called Project Prophecy. You created a system to detect terrorist attacks before they happen by decoding complex financial signals. In 2006, Prophecy detected a looming terrorist attack in London. Officials were able to intercept the attackers, saving countless lives. That same year, you began warning our intelligence officials in Washington of a looming financial crisis. In September 2006, the CIA circulated your warning among its senior staff. Your full thesis appeared in the CIA's official journal, Studies in Intelligence. That material remains classified. However, on August 24, 2007, you shared the same warning with officials from the U.S. Treasury Department. You even supplied Treasury with a plan for averting the crisis called Proposal to Obtain and Manage Information in Response to Capital Markets Crisis. Unfortunately, Washington failed to act on your warnings in time. The result was the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression. Now, Jim, you say we're about to experience a radically new kind of crisis. one that will freeze the financial system, leading to global chaos. In your new book, The Road to Ruin, you write, the next financial crisis will not be merely a bigger version of the 1998 and 2008 crises. It will be qualitatively different. It will encompass multiple asset classes on a global scale. It will exhibit inflation not seen since the 1970s, insolvency not seen since the 1930s, and exchange shutdowns not seen since 1914. State power will be summoned to contain panic. Capitalism will be discredited once and for all. Not only will the coming crisis destroy more investor wealth than 2008, not only will it last much longer than the Great Depression, this crisis will be historic for another reason. And I'm talking about this network of elites using the crises for cover. At the appointed hour, they'll launch their attacks, and the financial system will go dark worldwide. Trillions will vanish instantly, and in many cases, permanently. And hundreds of millions of Americans will be cut off from their own money for months or even years. Now, this sounds like the biggest confiscation of wealth in history, there's no doubt. So, Jim, let me ask, could you please share with our viewers where this threat is coming from and how to prepare?
Let's start with some background and context, because I know this must sound hard for some viewers to believe. I was having dinner with a friend not long ago in New York City. We met at a place called Oriole, which is in Midtown. My dinner companion that night was a senior advisor to BlackRock. As you may know, BlackRock is now the largest asset manager on the planet. It directly manages $5 trillion in assets, and it oversees another $11 trillion through its Aladdin platform. That means one firm controls more money than the GDPs of China, Russia, and Japan combined. Anyway, my dinner companion happens to work directly for BlackRock's CEO. As we nursed our white wine and the evening wore on, she let something slip. If I remember her words, she said something like, "They want to tell us we can't sell." What was she talking about? Who was she talking about? I placed a few calls, first to my contacts in Washington, then to a few people on Wall Street. Soon I was on a plane for a series of meetings to London, to Geneva, back to New York, then down to South America. As I began connecting the dots, a pattern emerged. It revealed a network of more than 189 individuals positioned inside the world's major financial institutions. Some of them hold senior positions inside the IMF, World Bank, and every central bank in the G20, including our own Federal Reserve. These elites share one vision, and they're about to make it a reality. That vision is one world order, one world taxation, and one world money. They've worked for years behind the scenes preparing to realize that vision. They've literally rigged the laws of international finance. Everything is basically in place right now, and there's essentially no way to stop this from happening. When the crisis hits, they'll flip the switch, freezing the global financial system. That will give them time to reset the world economy according to their vision. As the coming crisis unfolds, President Trump will be powerless to stop it. In fact, trying to stop them would probably weaken the president's power altogether.
That is amazing, Jim, really. So what did these elites want from your contact at BlackRock?
Basically, they want to classify BlackRock as too big to fail. The technical term is Systemically Important Financial Institution, or SIFI. That designation normally applies to banks, such as Bank of America. If your bank gets the SIFI label, it means the government will bail you out first in a crisis. But it also means you must turn over control of your bank until the crisis subsides. In this case, they're trying to reclassify BlackRock, an asset manager, as too big to fail. If they succeed, they'll be able to freeze BlackRock when the crisis hits. BlackRock clients won't be able to sell. They won't be able to buy either. Their accounts will go dark indefinitely. And the elite operatives will take control of BlackRock's assets remotely via the internet. But our research shows that their ICE 9 plan goes much, much deeper than that.
Now, you refer to their plan as ICE 9. You just said that. What does that mean?
It's a reference to the Kurt Vonnegut novel, Cat's Cradle. In the book, a mad scientist creates a new form of water molecule called ICE 9. When it comes in contact with other water molecules, it freezes them at room temperature. One drop of ICE 9 can freeze the whole ocean. And that's what these elite operatives are about to do to the world economy.
Now, can you share with our viewers exactly who these operatives are and what their ultimate goal might be?
Like I said, John, more than 189 elite agents have slowly wormed their way into leadership positions across the board. They now sit at or near the head of the IMF, the World Bank, and even our own Federal Reserve. They also control much of what happens at the central banks of China, Russia, India, Brazil, Canada, and Europe. As you know, these institutions form a kind of global superstructure. It forms a kind of snare net encircling all nations. Their leaders aren't democratically elected. They're not accountable to you and me. They're beyond the reach of government and citizens, and yet they hold the fate of the global financial system in their hands. To get a sense of how they operate, imagine an array of floating spheres. One sphere is labeled IMF, one is labeled Fed, one is labeled Bilderberg, one is labeled Wall Street, one is labeled central banks, one is labeled intelligence agencies, one is labeled media, and so on. The elites inhabit all of these spheres, and together the network forms a kind of 3D Venn diagram. As I see it, regardless of what sphere they inhabit, the elites all share the same vision: one world order, one world taxation, and one world money. All of their actions are geared toward moving that agenda forward.
Now, are you able to share the identities of these elites with our viewers?
We've identified more than 189 individuals who are in many cases hiding in plain sight. Regardless, they all share the same vision: one world order, one world taxation, and one world money. A short list would include Christine Lagarde, Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund, IMF; Mark Carney, Governor of the Bank of England; Raghuram G. Rajan, Vice Chairman of the Bank for International Settlements; Haruhiko Kuroda, Governor of the Bank of Japan; William C. Dudley, President of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York; Agustin Carstens, Governor of the Bank of Mexico; Janet Yellen, Chairman of the Board of the Federal Reserve System; Mario Draghi, President of the European Central Bank; Zhu Min, former Deputy Managing Director of the IMF; Zhou Zhouquan, Governor of the People's Bank of China; Robert E. Rubin, Chairman of the Council on Foreign Relations. This A-list of central bankers and other elites is just the tip of the iceberg. Of course, not one of these elites will tell you outright what's going on, but I've seen and heard enough to connect the dots for myself. Not long ago, for example, I met with one of their senior operatives. He's a leading economist who served as the chairman of the Federal Reserve during the last crisis. He's considered one of the most influential minds in banking today. We met privately during a conclave in Seoul, South Korea. Of course, I'm talking about Ben Bernanke. I came away from my meeting with him stunned and convinced that ICE 9 was real. Not long before that, I set up a one-on-one meeting with another member of the network. His name is Zhu Min, the former deputy governor of China's central bank. Until recently, he served as deputy managing director of the International Monetary Fund. Zhu is a brilliant guy, like Bernanke, and he's pleasant and well-meaning. There's no doubt in my mind that he's also a member of the elite network preparing to impose ICE 9 on millions of Americans. But I wasn't done with my research. I have since met with dozens of senior officials, intelligence analysts, and former Wall Street colleagues. My quest led to a final meeting, a face-to-face summit with the head of Bilderberg. We met at Rockefeller Center in Manhattan, and he was very eager to get my take on the euro as a currency. I was happy to provide it, of course, in exchange for some valuable intelligence. As I say in my new book, he did not have horns. In fact, he gave me a nice gift when we parted ways, a blue Swedish vase. I keep it in my writing studio at my home in Connecticut. But my point is, I came away from all three meetings convinced of one thing. When the next crisis hits, the elites are planning to freeze the financial system, and they'll replace it with a new system, one not based on the US dollar. When that happens, we'll wake up to a very strange and disturbing new reality.
And for our viewers that are watching today, what might their reality look like that morning? How does this manifest?
First, they'll have gone to bed knowing that a massive financial crisis was underway. But when they wake up, they'll find it has worsened and the contagion has spread worldwide. When they go to withdraw money, their ATM will say, closed temporarily. When they go to sell stocks, their account will say, transaction not available. When they go to their local business, that business will only accept cash if it's open. As citizens realize they're being barred from their money, riots will erupt. It's going to get really bad really quickly.
But how would such a freeze actually work? And wouldn't that be highly illegal?
Well, it wouldn't be illegal technically because they've been quietly laying the groundwork for years. They've rigged the financial laws, changed the rules of the game to allow this to happen. The stage is set. They have the levers in place. The lights are positioned. Now someone just needs to flick a switch and they'll impose ICE 9 rapidly. And again, all of this will be legal because they've rigged the system in their favor. Here in the US, for example, Congress pushed through something called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEPA. This allows the government to freeze accounts, assets, even whole institutions at will. The only condition is that there's some threat to national security with a foreign connection. Of course, with a global market, every financial crisis has a foreign connection. Any systemic crisis fits the bill. And the thing is, when the next crisis hits, it's going to be so bad, President Trump won't have any choice but to go along with the elite's plan.
Wow. That is, you have to admit, that sounds somewhat hard to believe. Now, how could these operatives actually freeze a whole country's financial system?
Well, fortunately, we have some recent real-life examples to study. The elites have been conducting a series of dry runs for years, leading up to ICE 9. Look at Cyprus, for example. A few years ago, the Cypriot economy was in trouble, especially the banks. The IMF stepped in and loaned Cyprus $10 billion, but the loan came with strings. Now pay attention because this is precisely what they're going to do. But imagine it on a global scale. So in exchange for the capital injection, the IMF demanded control over the Cypriot banking system. More specifically, the IMF froze the entire system, literally every bank in the country. And they did that to ensure the IMF's demands were met, including strict capital controls. So how did all this impact regular citizens? Their local ATMs went dark. Even the bank branches closed, permanently in some cases. Citizens could not withdraw cash. They couldn't even transfer funds from one account to the other. What came next? Wealth extraction on a grand scale. The IMF basically stole 6 to 10% of all the cash in the Cypriot bank accounts. How did the elites justify this? They called it a levy, the price regular citizens had to pay for their government's missteps. Keep in mind, these asset confiscations were done at the balance sheet level with the institutions themselves. They never had to confiscate individual accounts. They froze every account by controlling a handful of the country's biggest banks. When the next crisis hits, we're going to see this here in the US and around the world. And it'll be a highly coordinated global attack on the entire system simultaneously.
All right, but hold on here. Wasn't Cyprus a fairly isolated example of the globalist elites taking over a nation's banking system?
Not even close, John. The same thing has happened in other places. It's happening in Greece right now. As you know, Greece has been navigating a massive debt crisis for years. In 2015, the IMF and their partners moved in to recapitalize Greece's banks. That just means they agreed to pump capital back into the stalled system, like priming a pump. In return, the IMF demanded control of the banks and citizens' individual accounts by default. Suddenly, Greek families weren't allowed to withdraw more than $460 per week. Imagine trying to pay your mortgage, gas, and groceries on less than $500, let alone your medical insurance. Of course, it led to widespread panic, rioting, and worse. And that's exactly what we'll see on a global scale when the next crisis hits.
Now, clearly, a national freeze can devastate the citizens big time. So my question is, why would the elites even want to do that?
Well, you're right, of course. This has been devastating to Greek citizens. But the short answer is control. To save itself from insolvency, Greece gave up its economic autonomy. The country is, for all intents and purposes, under the control of the European Central Bank and the IMF. Yet this top-down approach still hasn't solved the problem. As one Greek official told Reuters, the banks are in a deep freeze, but the economy is getting weaker. This is a microcosm of what we're about to see in America and around the world.
But still, I mean, really, aren't Greece and Cyprus fairly isolated examples?
Unfortunately, if you think governments tend to keep their hands off citizens' assets, you're mistaken. Elites have a long history of seizing control of people, institutions, and especially money. In February of 1917, for example, the Russian elite, who believed in a one-world workers' party, closed the stock market. Folks lost every penny. Their portfolios literally vanished overnight. The Russian exchanges remained closed for nearly 70 years. They reopened in January of 1992. In December of 1941, China closed its stock market without warning. It stayed closed for 4 years. The German government closed the stock market from July 1931 to April 1932 during a credit crisis. The list of examples goes on, and it goes back decades.
But again, I have to ask you, could such a systematic freeze really happen here in the United States?
It already has happened, John, multiple times, just on a smaller scale. In 1914, the Treasury Department shuttered the New York Stock Exchange for 4 months. Citizens couldn't buy or sell. They couldn't cash out. They couldn't do anything. England's elites did the same thing to the London Stock Exchange. But we've seen more recent examples too. If you want to see what a modern-day ICE 9 freeze looks like, take a look at this image. Those blue dots represent trades on the New York Stock Exchange on July 8, 2015. You can see where they abruptly stop. That was the moment the elites running the exchange pulled the plug. You weren't allowed to buy or sell a single share, period. But I want people to take a closer look at this chart. Now imagine it represents all the banking and brokerage activity on Earth. You see that point around 11:33 a.m. when you had the first big drop-off in activity? That represents the beginning of the coming ICE 9 cash freezes. Now you see when all the activity stops and the screen goes totally white? All activity ceases. The system goes dark. The pattern is the same with these freezes every time. You have some initial trigger or shock, then you have an immediate freeze, and the elites emerge with more control. You see it over and over. Shock, freeze, power grab. Shock, freeze, power grab. With ICE 9, we'll see a global shock and a global freeze, And then we'll see the elites making a global power grab. Here's another example, again with the New York Stock Exchange. On October 27, 1997, the Dow had lost 350 points quickly. Again, the elites responded by shuttering the entire New York Stock Exchange instantaneously. Imagine if you had been trying to sell. Your money would have been locked into the system and your net worth would have been plummeting by the second. Meanwhile, you're just watching it happen, totally powerless to do anything about it. What we're seeing right now is an increase in the tempo of these mini shocks and mini freezes. They're coming faster and faster. You had 9/11, followed by a freeze. We had the flash crash of 2010, followed by a freeze. And in 2012 with Hurricane Sandy.
But you're talking about American stock markets. I mean, if the elites do freeze our exchanges and brokerage accounts, won't our cash be safe in the banks?
No. In fact, the biggest bank freeze to date happened right here in the USA. Of course, I'm talking about Roosevelt signing Proclamation 2039 in 1933. With one stroke of his pen, FDR shuttered every bank in America. A few weeks later, he followed up by freezing the entire gold market. Executive Order 6102 literally outlawed citizens from owning gold. That freeze lasted 41 years until Gerald Ford ended that freeze in 1974. When the coming crisis hits, we'll see this repeated on a larger scale through the IMF, World Bank, and the Fed. Again, there will be nothing the White House can do. They have no direct control over the institutions that will carry this out. Not even the U.S. president can control the Fed. Same with the IMF, the World Bank, the Bank of International Settlements, or the People's Bank of China. When the crisis hits, it will likely be bad enough that Trump would get on board anyway. But it won't be enough to save his presidency. Even if he survives his first term, he won't get a second one.
But we really haven't addressed one important factor here. Now, you say the elites will need an excuse to impose ICE 9 on America, and that excuse will come in the form of a massive financial crisis, much worse than 2008. And you say that this crisis could come within the next 6 weeks. Regardless of the actual day it hits, you say the coming crisis is unavoidable. So please explain to our viewers what you mean by that exactly.
In the aftermath of the 2008 crisis, the Pentagon recruited me for another special project. Our goal was to create a new system for modeling and predicting systemic financial collapse. I received an invitation to a classified meeting at the Los Alamos National Laboratory in New Mexico. This meeting occurred on April 8, 2009. In attendance were several of our country's leading physicists and national security experts. We met at Los Alamos for an important reason. The lab there houses the most powerful modeling systems on the planet. They're running predictive modeling simulations on everything from weather events to nuclear chain reactions. Los Alamos National Laboratory takes a system-based approach to predictive modeling. Their computers don't look at events in isolation. They look at the whole system, how the events interact with each other. It's a relatively new branch of physics called complexity theory. You can look at the approach in a number of different ways. It's like seeing the forest for the trees. It's like understanding all the dominoes in a chain reaction. Let me give you an example of this approach. Let's say you have 10 dominoes lined up on a table, and you have 2 observers. One observer, Joe, sees all 10 dominoes from the beginning of the experiment. The second observer, Sally, can only see 1 domino, the 7th in the series. Looking at domino number 7, Sally can still make plenty of observations. It appears stable, for example. It also appears just as likely to fall in one direction as the other. She can study it for years, and she can assume it will never fall. On the other hand, Joe sees all 10 dominoes, including number 7. So one day a force comes along and tips domino number 1 into domino number 2. At that moment, Joe can tell you with near 100% certainty that domino 7 is about to fall. Sally, on the other hand, continues along blissfully unaware, yet with total expertise when it comes to domino number 7. She just can't see how it fits into the system of dominoes, and she can't see the inevitable event coming. When domino 7 falls, Sally is caught almost completely unaware. Well, in essence, Sally represents the mainstream economists and media pundits. Joe represents the approach we developed at Los Alamos National Laboratory. And I've since refined that approach into an advanced threat detection system called Los Alamos Multi-Factor Projection, or LAMP, LAMP. LAMP uses advanced computer assisted modeling and systems-based analysis to shine a light on systemic risk. And it can show us for the first time all the dominoes at play in the world financial system. You can look at our economy like a very long series of dominoes. Some run north-south, some run east-west, but they all interconnect at some point. Together, they form a complex system. Our Los Alamos multi-factor model was designed to analyze that system. So what are we seeing from our analysis? In complexity terms, our system has entered into a critical state. The dominoes have begun to fall, and the next crisis is now inevitable. And when that crisis hits, the elites will impose ICE 9, freezing the world financial system.
You've shown us how they've rigged the system in their favor. And when the coming crisis hits, they'll simply flip a series of switches, freezing the whole system very rapidly. And your system indicates that the dominoes have already begun to fall. So can you share with us some of what those dominoes might be?
The first domino shock hit on October 15th in 2014. Between 9:33 and 9:45 a.m., liquidity pretty much disappeared in the Treasury market, and that's the most liquid market in the world. Inside of about 6 minutes, yields tanked 16 basis points from 2.02% to 1.86%. Over the next 6 minutes, yields jumped back up to 1.99% before ending the day around 2.14%. The Treasury market is enormous. It moves like a glacier, not an avalanche, but this was an historic anomaly. As JP Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon said, Treasury securities move 40 basis points, statistically 7 to 8 standard deviations, an unprecedented move, an event that is supposed to happen only once in every 3 billion years or so. This was no random event. This was a domino. This was exactly what you'd expect to see when a complex system goes critical.
Let's take a look at domino shock number 2 now.
For years, investors were loading up on Swiss francs as a safer alternative to the euro. The demand drove the franc higher. This created pressures in the Swiss economy, mainly by driving up the price of Swiss exports. The Swiss tried to control demand by pegging the franc's value to the euro. The idea was to make both currencies equally attractive and keep investors from piling into francs. But once the European Central Bank started talking about quantitative easing, the Swiss got nervous. And on January 15, 2015, the Swiss Central Bank shocked the world and scrapped the franc to euro peg. The Swiss franc, a major currency, mind you, soared 20% in 20 minutes. We've never seen anything quite like it. The real losers were the Swiss stockholders. They took a 10% haircut almost immediately. Even the big safe companies nosedived. Credit Suisse lost 11% in a matter of minutes. The elites took control and triggered a bloodbath. Basically, they made it worse.
Are there any more examples of these domino events that we should know about?
Between August 10th and August 31st of 2015, the Dow tanked 11%. Here's what actually happened. In August of 2015, the Chinese central bank decided to devalue the yuan. Again, they wanted to keep the currency cheap to drive Chinese exports. So they devalued about 3.2% over 2 days, a huge move for a major currency. What happened next? The Shanghai Stock Exchange plunged 43%, erasing $3 trillion in Chinese investor wealth. Then it rippled across the Pacific and wiped out another $2.5 trillion here in the US. It caused similar panic across Asia, Europe, even South America. Now let's take a look at domino shock number 4. Throughout the first half of 2016, Britain was pondering leaving the European Union. The people were set to vote on June 23rd for remain or leave the Union. 3 days before the vote, my team and I flew to London for a series of meetings. We applied the LAMP system to analyze all the factors involved. We got a hit on 2 important indicators. Just before the vote, the pound jumped from $1.40 to $1.50, and gold dropped from $13.05 to $12.60 an ounce. The market was pricing the pound and gold for remain. The experts gave almost no chance to Brexit going through, but LAMP indicated approximately a 50-50 chance of leaving or staying. With gold and the pound already priced for remain, they would stay stable if remain won. But if remain lost, gold would absolutely skyrocket and sterling would plunge. There were 2 ways to play it, long play on gold and a short play on sterling. Of course, leave did win. Pound sterling plunged from $1.50 to $1.32 within hours, a 12% decline. Again, absolutely no precedent in history for these kinds of swings in major currencies. But this provides a perfect example for how LAMP works. I applied the system to Brexit and it modeled out a possible spike in gold. That was the next domino, of course. So I recommended that my followers go long gold on June 20th, 3 days before Brexit. Here's what happened. Again, LAMP indicated no meaningful movement in gold prices if remain won. But it indicated a massive spike if leave won, which is what happened. The domino fell and gold spiked 4.8% in a single afternoon. Had you acted on my June 20th directive, you could have made a fortune on gold and gold stocks in particular. Gold Mountain Mining jumped 11 cents a share to 36 cents, for example. That's a 227% winner in 30 days. Not bad. What this shows you is that we can now predict with reasonable accuracy what's coming next. And not only can you protect yourself, you can make a good deal of money if you prepare. The other thing to notice here is how the tempo of these events is building. We're seeing unreleased energy from one foreshock spilling over into the next in increasingly rapid succession. Our next example is India. Keep in mind, India is a G20 nation and the 7th largest economy in the world. On November 8, 2016, Prime Minister Modi took to the airwaves for an unscheduled announcement. During his address, he imposed one of the larger scale cash freezes we've ever seen. Modi banned the use of 500 and 1,000 rupee notes, and they ceased being legal tender just 4 hours later. That means 80% of India's cash supply became worthless on 4 hours' notice. That would be like someone banning the use of $5 bills and $10 bills by midnight tonight. Imagine the chaos that would cause here. Of course, the Indians didn't have to imagine. If I could read this quote from the BBC, the 500 and 1,000 rupee notes in every man and woman's pocket were suddenly redundant. People started flocking to banks and ATMs to withdraw cash or exchange the old notes. The queues are long and people are short of cash. Even buying daily essentials like milk and bread has become difficult. Police have had to be called in at some banks and ATMs to calm tempers. The government's publicly stated aim was to end corruption. That's what they always say. The real aim was wealth extraction and total taxation. Until the cash freeze, some 90% of India's economy ran on cash and private peer-to-peer transactions. The government couldn't get its cut of those transactions. Going forward, that won't be the case. So again, forget what they're saying on TV. This is really about control and wealth extraction. Of course, the local currency, the rupee, dropped through the floor when this news hit. And that's what we're about to see on a global scale with ICE 9. We're just waiting for the next domino to fall.
All right, wait. How about the Federal Reserve? I mean, won't it be able to step in with more money printing to stabilize the system? Isn't that what we saw with the 2008 crisis?
The people who run the Fed are true believers in the vision. One world order, one world taxation, one world money. They've done their part to undermine the dollar, printing up $4.2 trillion in funding money, and all of it remains on the balance sheet. This is what pressure looks like in a complex system. Now, could the Fed print even more dollars? Could it increase its balance sheet to $10 trillion, $20 trillion? Who knows? What we do know is the coming crisis will involve a catastrophic liquidity shortage. There won't be enough capital in the system to keep the world economy going. But the Fed won't be in a position to print more dollars like they did the last time. That will leave the task of refloating the system to their fellow elites at the IMF. The IMF will take over and reset the monetary system, but not with dollars. This is how eras end. This is how empires and presidencies end.
Look, I'm sure some of our viewers are overwhelmed right now. So can you please summarize everything we've covered up to this point so folks can start preparing?
Our LAMP model shows the coming crisis unfolding in 5 stages. First, you have the initial domino event. Second, the dominoes will go from falling in an orderly way to a series of collapses. The markets will drop an estimated 60 to 70%. Gold will spike to $5,000 an ounce or higher. Treasury yields will go deep into negative territory. And that's when the elites will freeze the global financial system from the top down. Within 48 hours, you'll lose access to your money, period. In some cases, access will terminate permanently. When the elites refloat the system, they won't do it with US dollars. They'll do it with new world currency. I'm talking about the official currency of the IMF, special drawing rights.
For our viewers who aren't familiar, what exactly are special drawing rights?
So the IMF has invented something called special drawing rights, or SDRs. From inception, the IMF intended for SDRs to replace the dollar as the new reserve currency. They've been planning for this event for many years, patiently waiting. When the next crisis hits, we'll see SDRs taking center stage and replacing the dollar for major transactions between banks, businesses, and billionaires. The IMF has already started issuing SDR-denominated bonds through the World Bank. And when the next crisis hits, they'll refloat the world financial system in exactly this way, by issuing mountains of SDRs to governments and international institutions worldwide. The dollar will get left out of the new equation, and Americans will wake up to a new post-dollar reality just 48 hours later. Here's the final twist. They won't be issuing any of these SDRs to individual Americans. We'll be left with dollars, which will become like our version of the Mexican peso.
Why are the elites so anxious to bring about one world money? I mean, what's the end game?
The end game is control and wealth extraction. If you have one world money, you can have one world central bank, the IMF. Once you have one world money and one world order, all overseen by the elites, they can begin wealth extraction on a grand scale. I'm not just talking about taxation, although a world taxation plan is in the works for after ICE 9. I'm talking about all kinds of confiscation of assets. They'll come after every penny they can through taxation, penalties, regulatory schemes, bank levies, trumped-up criminal prosecutions, and good old-fashioned thievery. In the end, we'll see the rise of neo-fascism around the world, along with a massive redistribution of wealth. The elites will come out the big winners. Everyone else, including the middle class, will come out devastated.
You write in your new book, The Road to Ruin, once capital is frozen, capitalism itself is gone. Are you saying that the coming crisis will lead to the death of capitalism itself?
Yes, I'm saying that we won't recover from the next crisis. We're about to go through a one-way door. There is no turning back. This won't be about fixing the capitalist system. It will be about replacing it. All we're waiting for now is the big domino.
That's an incredible warning, Jim, and one we here at the Daily Reckoning hope that viewers will heed. In fact, we're taking it a step further. We've partnered with Jim Rickards to produce an exclusive edition of his new book. It's called The Road to Ruin, The Global Elite's Secret Plan for the Next Financial Crisis. Now, this book reveals everything you need to know about the coming crisis, and we're rushing copies out to viewers of this presentation for free. Again, we have a limited supply, so I urge you to claim your complimentary copy today. Inside, you'll discover 242 pages of truly shocking information. You'll discover how Jim's LAMP system proves the coming crisis must happen. And you'll discover exactly what's going to happen when the elites roll out ICE 9, including how to prepare. You'll go inside the secret meetings that confirm these facts, including Jim's one-on-one meetings with the head of the Bilderberg Group, former Fed Chair Ben Bernanke, Zhu Min, Deputy Managing Director of the IMF, and more. The Road to Ruin will serve as your survival guide to the coming crisis.
And there's a good reason for that, John. The book itself is going to be interesting to economists, journalists, and anyone who's concerned about the rampant abuses of power among the elite. But I wanted to create a special edition just for our viewers here today. So this edition of the book contains a special missing chapter. Inside, people will discover a detailed portfolio of recommendations. They include stocks, bonds, precious metals, currencies, real estate, and more. All of these investments are perfectly tailored for the conditions we're seeing now and likely to see over the next 6 months. We spent literally hundreds of thousands of dollars in more than 10 months vetting every one of these recommendations. But folks who claim their copy of the special edition will get them all for free.
Jim, I'm sure our viewers would love to know what's in the portfolio right now. Can you share any details?
Sure. The ICE 9 portfolio breaks down into 8 asset classes. It starts with physical gold and silver. A common mistake people make is confusing physical gold with what I call paper gold. By that I mean gold futures, ETFs, gold certificates, and gold stocks. Folks should make sure they have a proper allocation to physical gold before adding paper gold to their portfolios. So that's the top priority. Then you should have a large percentage in cash, including some in physical notes. That sounds counterintuitive, but remember, this is what you should be holding right now. As conditions change, our portfolio will adapt, and I'll keep readers updated. Next, we're recommending holding land. This could include your residence, but we've zeroed in on a handful of recommended plays in this space. In particular, I recommend looking at arable farmland and specific retirement properties. The next allocation might surprise some people too. I'm recommending a specific percentage in fine art. In particular, look for museum quality works by known artists. Most people don't realize this, but you can own a genuine Picasso for $10,000 or less. I'll show you how. The final allocation goes to stocks, hedge funds, bonds, and venture capital. In total, the ICE 9 portfolio contains 8 asset classes. I reveal the exact percentages in the book. And in the bonus chapter, I provide the specific recommendations that fit within each class.
Powerful stuff, Jim. But we haven't even talked about what's in the book itself. On page 196, you expose the identity of what you call the new Praetorian Guard, the high-tech government forces that will enforce ICE 9 and suppress the coming money riots. On page 53, you reveal the identities of the 4 horsemen of the coming apocalypse. These are elites, names our viewers will recognize, who are hastening the arrival of ICE 9 and preparing to usher in the next world order. On page 107, you unmask the identity of the 14 families that really control Wall Street. These are the elite of the financial elite, and you reveal how and why they loved watching Bear Stearns collapse. On page 52, you blow the cover off the secret gathering places of the elite, including locations and dates. This is where they're planning our future without our input. You tell readers who they are, what they're doing, and how to counter their next move. Of course, this special edition contains the missing chapter and your proprietary portfolio for navigating ICE 9. But you're including something else with this special edition, and I'm talking about a raft of tools our viewers can use to navigate the coming crisis. And together, they form something called the ICE 9 Prep Kit. And for viewers who claim their kits today, they'll get it all for free. Now, Jim, can you walk us through everything folks will receive if they respond right away?
We expect a very fast-moving crisis, John. The The book will provide you with a foundation, the basic knowledge of the playing field. But things are going to start changing very quickly. We'll need to adjust our game plan as new information enters the equation. Each month, we'll assess the situation on the ground. We'll talk about what the elites are up to. I'll reveal what's going on behind the scenes and the headlines. We'll expose the real actions and motives of the Fed, the IMF, the World Bank, and the elites in Washington and Wall Street. What's more, we'll stay one step ahead of their every move, and I'll recommend specific adjustments to our recommended portfolio as needed. These private conclaves will be kept secret. I would urge attendees to please not publicize the sensitive intelligence we reveal. That ensures we'll retain our information advantage.
Now, normally Jim's briefings are reserved for members of Congress, the White House, the CIA, and powerful insiders from firms like BlackRock and Citigroup. But finally, you'll have direct access to the man who advises them all. And you'll receive this intelligence before anyone else, before the president, before Congress, and before the Federal Reserve. I hope you can see what kind of edge that will give you in the markets. But you're including something else in the ICE 9 prep kit.
Yes. So what's the first thing most people do in a crisis? They panic. And what do investors do when they panic? They sell everything and buy gold, right? As we get closer to ICE 9, the gold markets are starting to gyrate pretty wildly. LAMP indicates that gold will crest to between $9,000 and $10,000 an ounce long term. But it also shows there will be massive peaks and valleys along the way. So we began modeling trade scenarios that did two things. Number one, allows us to capitalize on the huge up moves we're going to see in gold. And number two, protect our downside from losses. My team has in fact discovered the perfect gold trade in this regard. It starts with an anomaly our system identified in the gold markets. I say markets because there are really two gold markets. One is for physical gold. One is for what I call paper gold, like futures, gold certificates, gold stocks, and ETFs. You can track the price action between physical and paper gold using two ETFs. The first one is GLD, which tracks physical gold. The second one is GDX, which tracks gold mining stocks like Barrick and Newmont. When we began modeling the relationship between these two ETFs, a pattern emerged. Over the past 10 years, the miners have plummeted in price relative to gold. I can't go into too much depth here, but this pattern is reversing right now. Over the past 200 days, miners have jumped over 90% as a group. Gold has risen about 25%. That's creating a huge opportunity, but how do you play it? We've created the perfect way to capture 10-bagger gains with very limited downside using options. We can even calculate how much folks could make on this trade down to the penny based on an initial investment of just $1,800. When gold goes to $1,500, you'd pocket $2,000, an easy double. If gold goes to $2,500, you'd earn about $8,000. If it goes to $5,000 an ounce, you'd pocket $23,000, and so on. If you double your initial investment to $3,600, all those numbers double too. So you'd pocket $46,000 in a matter of months, with just $3,600 at risk. Actually, much less at risk because of the way we've structured the trade. The remarkable thing is that our perfect gold trade removes nearly all the downside.
And you've put all the details into another new report, which you call The Perfect Gold Trade, the safest way to 1,178% gains. When folks claim their free copy of your book, we'll send them this report as well, also free. You say the US dollar will fall in the next crisis. It will be replaced by special drawing rights, or SDRs.
Yes, and the elites are racing to find a way to invest in SDRs now before they become the new reserve currency. When that happens, the value of SDRs will skyrocket. But remember, when they refloat the system, they'll flood the world economy with SDRs. But that money won't trickle down to you and me. It will remain at the top of the system in the vaults of central banks, monetary agencies, and global corporations. We'll be left with near worthless dollars for everyday transactions.
But you provide 6 more currency investments poised to soar as ICE 9 unfolds. Folks can make all these moves without trading risky Forex. One of them involves an unusual silver coin, and you say it's the perfect complement to your recommended gold plays.
We actually believe that silver will rise much further and faster than gold on a percentage basis. After the 2008 panic, gold surged 29%, but silver rose 83%. That's about a 3-to-1 ratio in terms of price action, and it's fairly typical of the silver-gold relationship. In other words, if gold soars roughly 6-fold to $10,000 an ounce, silver could rise 18-fold, a 1,800% rally. But as with gold, not all silver coins are made equal. That's why we've studied this area extensively in preparation for ICE 9. and I've identified the single best silver coin to own today.
Okay, let's review everything you'll receive when you claim your kit today. Of course, you'll receive the special edition of The Road to Ruin, complete with the missing chapter, and the Ice 9 portfolio, the perfect gold trade, the safest way to 1,178% gains. And you'll receive everything mentioned above for free. How do you claim your Ice 9 prep kit right now? Simply agree to take Jim Rickards' monthly advisory letter for a test drive. That's it. It's called Jim Rickards' Strategic Intelligence. This letter is read by high-ranking members of our intelligence community, Wall Street titans, hedge fund managers, and other elites. But now, you can access these same high-level ideas with your Strategic Intelligence subscription. Strategic Intelligence delivers Jim's analysis and latest recommendations every month. You'll receive first-hand intelligence on developments inside the Fed, Congress, and other powerful institutions. More importantly, you'll be able to adjust your investments accordingly, keeping at least 6 months ahead of even Wall Street. That gives you an information advantage, and it could very well save your family's financial life when ICE 9 hits. But Strategic Intelligence goes well beyond the monthly issues. For more details and to get started right away, simply click the button below. Now, I want to thank Jim Rickards for joining us today. And Jim, it has been a real wake-up call and, I have to say, an extremely useful conversation. So, Jim, any parting words for any viewer out there wondering what to do next?
Well, in a word, prepare. Prepare now. Don't wait. The system is on red alert right now. The switch could be flipped tomorrow. It could be flipped next week. But when they flip the switch, it'll freeze your accounts instantly. You will not have time to react. So the only way to protect your family is with preparation. So even if you don't read the book, I would encourage you to move at least some of your assets out of the system now and be ready for whatever chaos is coming our way.
All right. Thank you very much, Jim, for your time today. Really do appreciate that. And with that, I'm John Burke for Jim Rickards and the Daily Reckoning. Signing off.